السلام عليكم. بسم الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Our organizers said, let's talk about the resurgence of Islamic banking. But to have a resurgence, you actually have to have been somewhere first. You actually have to have done it. And the last Islamic banking transaction done before the colonial era was in 1492, when the Spanish, devoid of their own commercial law, used a mudaraba to finance Columbus's voyage to what he thought would be China. So I've come ahead and I've said, no, actually we have an urgence. And what's the basis of the urgence? The basis of the urgence is our Quranic guidance that says that we have to live without certain things and we have to live in a certain manner. Some of those things that we have to live without are things like riba, and some of the things that we have to live, defining our manner, are things that cause us to deal with each other in a certain fashion, that eliminates controllable misunderstanding, controllable lack of clarity in our dealings commercially and otherwise, something called gharar. So we have an urgency as Muslims to do two things. The first one is to understand what these things are that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to do, and secondarily, to know how do we fit them into our lives where we are. Now we happen to be in America, so there's a reason to understand how we do it here, and that's my job. Now, I think it's a little bit simple for me. Why would I want Islamic financial services? It's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said to me 4 times in the Holy Quran that riba is forbidden. And so there's something called riba which I shouldn't want in my life. I shouldn't overtly be involved with. Unfortunately, I don't have a detailed definition in the Holy Quran, so now I have to go somewhere else. I have to go to, in fact, a family of 6 hadith that are sahih, that deal with the issue of riba. The essence of these hadith is very interesting. It really says to me that most of those things that in the English language we choose to call interest are in fact riba. Now pay attention, I said most of those things. Because some of the things in the English language that they call interest are not necessarily riba. Now most of what you might do at a bank would in fact be ribawi. But not everything. A bank is allowed to buy a piece of equipment and lease it to you. And the bank regulators will say that the rental stream that you pay for the equipment is interest. But it's not. It's rent for equipment. So we have to be careful with what we mean by definitions. And if I were to distill the essence of the issue, riba exists when what we essentially are paying for is the passage of time. Riba is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly forbids, and from the hadith we can define it and distill it into the payment of money for the passage of time alone. So conversely, an acceptable financial transaction in Sharia would be the payment for the use of an asset, the payment for the development of an asset, in which the contracts are explicitly asset linked. And that's very different from what happens in most bank loans. Now we have an Islamic residential product, to give you an example, and people say, it's very much like a mortgage. And it is very much like a mortgage, but it's different. And the biggest difference comes when the person says 3 years into the transaction, I'd like a bigger and better car, I think I'll go get a home equity line, and they go down to see the local bank, they go down to Nations Bank, and Nations Bank says, we can't give you a home equity line because you don't own your home, because it's a lease program. We lease the program, the home to the person. So there's a difference. The result may be very similar, but the nature of our contractual relationship is very different. And there are some benefits to the differences. If you have a mortgage, a conventional mortgage, you owe money. If you want to go to Hajj, you're supposed to have discharged your debts before going to Hajj. So ideally, you wouldn't still owe that money. If you have some of the Islamic arrangements to acquire a house, you don't owe money. You are leasing property, or you are sharing in the ownership of property, and you are free to go on Hajj because you do not have a debt. So you get very different results. Now, this is kind of interesting. Does this mean I talked too long? So what are our choices as Muslims? We can use leasing as a vehicle. We can use something called installment sales, which are defined frequently as murabaha. And we can use shared equity, something that we see in some of the cooperatives helping people to finance their homes in different parts of the country. We can use direct equity. Now, we use leasing a lot, and we're using a leasing program with a lot of masajid and a lot of schools. We're using it in conjunction with the society here to develop the new masjid, and we're using it under a model. There are two ways to do leasing. You can do an operating lease, which at the end of the lease term, I get it back and I take all the risk of ownership permanently. Or we can do ijara wa iqtina, which is effectively a lease-to-own concept. Now, I put up net lease for a purpose. In a net lease, I'm going to charge you in my rent that I charge you everything it costs me to own it. And I can go two pathways at the end of the lease term. And I can agree to you about these pathways. One pathway causes me at the end of the lease term to say, I've recovered all my cost of ownership. Why wouldn't I allow you to buy out the lease at a bargain? The other pathway says, you caused me to take such great risk that no, you can't buy me out. Ijara wa iqtina is explicitly allowing the tenant the right to buy out at a defined cost. It allows the recovery of ownership cost, it allows the ability to transfer, it allows tax management, and it's highly adaptable for institutions. Now, I'm going to talk about things like that as we go ahead, because we think, my organization thinks, that we are about 10 million people in America today, and we think that about a third of us really would like to know how to arrange our lives without riba. Now, if I were to fiddle with the numbers a little bit, I'd bring that third down to 600,000 adults, and if I drew from my hat a number, $160-some-odd thousand for the average cost of a house for a Muslim in America, I'd say that those 600,000 adults represent a $100 billion home market. Now, for perspective, the valuation of all of the Islamic banks in the world today is about $200 billion of assets under management. And if I throw in what Citibank and our organization and other organizations in the West do, I can get it maybe all the way up to up to a couple $100 billion more, but I can't get it up to the types of monies, not $100 billion. I can get up to $3, $4 billion, $5 billion, $100 billion. I can't get it all the way up to serve the American home needs alone. So we're going to have to find something that an institutional investor, whoever he or she, whatever it is, will find interesting to invest in. That it's a good deal for you as a consumer, it's a good deal for them as an investor. Just like the conventional markets find various consumer things to be good deals. So that's something we're trying to do, transition Islamic ideas to mainstream acceptance, so that the mainstream says working with Muslims makes sense. And so the mainstream helps us to help ourselves to become financially stronger. Now, installment sales are used a lot in the Arab world. They're theoretically used in Pakistan and Iran, although there's some questions about how these things are done at the banks there in both countries. The historical Sharia concept is murabaha, and I buy it, I sell it to you, I may or may not give you terms. If I have a banking license, I like murabaha at first because most bank regulators, most countries say, it looks and smells like a loan to me, so you may treat it as a loan, and I don't care that you take title. A lot of consumers like murabaha because they get title right away. With a lease transaction, you actually don't get title. and the tax ownership flows with the sale, and that becomes important. We have some states where we're involved in the Islamic transactions where if we do the lease program, the local authorities say, that's okay. We know that a 501c3 is going to use this property, so we will forgive the local taxes because we would have forgiven them anyway. Other places say, nope, I see your name on the register, so you pay the taxes. I don't care about who uses it. So Murabaha takes that problem away. What a lot of people don't like about Murabaha from the conventional side is it looks and smells too much exactly like what they thought they were getting away from in the first place, even if in fact it is a valid Sharia contract. What I don't like as somebody in the financial services industry is very simply this. The Sharia forbids me to securitize this transaction. The ulama, except in Malaysia, have all agreed that the buying and selling of these contracts at any price other than par is not permitted. So that gives me no ability to turn around and bring other people to invest. I can't go and make these transactions, get investors, because investors will have different goals at different times of the week, month, year. So this is an interesting vehicle, a useful vehicle, but very limited. Shared equity is another idea, and it's a great idea for community building. And a lot of people are using it, particularly in Toronto. It works on a declining balance. I put my money with you, our money together, buys something, a house, a building, builds something, buys, and over time, I pay rent to us, and I buy out your share of the equity with my share of the revenues. It requires much lower level of organization than anything else we will and have talked about, and it's very adaptable to regional needs. I'll give you an example. Some states have cooperative laws that are really strict. In New York, a cooperative has to look, smell, and feel very much like a bank. But in Missouri, a cooperative can be a group of people cooperating. Now, think about it for a moment. New York is the world's banking center, and therefore the banks don't want other people to get in their business. Missouri has a historical tie to the popular farm movement, the Grange movement, the self-help movement of the old Franco-German farmers that settled back there in the 1800s. So the state likes to help the little guy organize things. So place by place, small groups of people can do some very interesting things here. Direct equity, musharaka, throw out some terms, mudaraba, a type of limited partnership, istisna. These are all sort of big words that hang out there in the dialogue about Islamic finance. Now, the positives and the negatives of these things are very simple. Who is going to provide them, and how much organization do you have to bring them forward? They all get you where you want to be, a riba-free life. But they also require a fairly high level of organization. And if the work is done outside of a banking environment, you may find yourself in a securities environment. You may find yourself in a place where you have to get a large group of people together. If we look at some of the organizations that have been doing very good work in Islamic finance in America for a long time, we realize that over 15 years, they've grown from $1 to $15 million. Now, that's a big achievement, but it's because they're here. They're coming to you and me, and they're saying, we've got a good idea, let's build it together. And you're saying, and I'm saying, this is a really good guy, but he's also a cardiologist. So I'm not going to give him the $50,000 if I have it that I was going to give to Merrill Lynch. I'm not going to give him the $5,000 if I have it that I was going to put in the bank. I'll give him the throwaway money, my totally dispensable money, and see how he does. That's what they've been building on, because this requires more organization and higher risk. Also, none of these are areas which a bank could be involved in today. Now, I work in a subsidiary now of a bank. And where the banking industry is, it's in a very interesting place. It's in a place of federal modernization and deregulation. So the banking laws as we know them today are about to change radically. And there could never be a better time for you to write your congressman or write your senator and say that you would really like to see certain things happen so that Muslims could have financial services defined the way they want them. Now, unfortunately, it looks like what's going to happen is going to happen in a different way, which I'll get to. But we are going to have a new banking system probably by the end of this year, which will have major implications both for how Muslims will be allowed by the federal regulators to organize their monies and also for how everybody else will interact. Now, I call the new legislation, by the way, the big bank, big insurance, big securities company legislation. It's all the giants getting together to step on all the little guys. So that means we're going to have to look for other things to develop Islamic finance if the mainstream areas are not going to be the most friendly. Securitization of assets is going to be a key area for us to develop. And then there are some special things that we will have, whether that's us collectively or us institutionally, that will be different from what the big guys will have that will allow us to deliver services. Up until now, a bank is not allowed to own property. A bank is not easily allowed, except for its branches, incidental to its business. A bank is not allowed easily to invest in insurance or be invested in by an insurance company, to have broad securities operations or to be owned by a securities operation. So many of the financial services that we see in other countries as bundled together in one institution in the United States are not allowed to be bundled. What bank modernization is going to be doing is going to be allowing a greater degree of bundling, but mostly for really big companies, the Citibanks, the Bank of Americas, the Bank Ones of the world will have a huge array of new freedoms. At the same time, though, as we've been modernizing the last few years, the controller of the currency, which regulates little guys and national banks, has been saying, since everything's going to change, I'm going to take the point of view that if it's like something a bank is allowed to do yesterday, if it's enough like it, then I'll let a bank do it today. And so what I've been doing with my colleagues is going to the controller's office on a periodic basis and saying, there are people of the Islamic faith that would like to have these services, but if we do it with the conventional banking contract, they won't take them. And we won't give them because we want to also follow the Sharia ourselves. And so the controller has been coming up with a series of approvals which say, this is not the same as a mortgage, but the risk-taking that a bank does to provide this new service is enough like it that we permit you to do it. This is not the same as providing credit, but it's enough like the installment credit powers that banks have that will let you do it. And so slowly but surely we've been getting the authority to take title in transactions, to have the leasing transactions that are Islamically oriented excluded from the caps that banks have on leases, because banks are restricted in how many leases. So we've been slowly but surely chipping away at things. And this has a meaning for competition. It means that what I've been working very hard at for 4 years to get the authorities to approve is now going to be law. It's going to be enshrined in the new law. The Congress is saying, why shouldn't we let banks have more authority? As long as they're within the risk-taking parameters that we allowed before, why not let them all do it? Why just give approvals to this strange little Arab bank? Just let everybody do the same things. So slowly but surely, if the bills are approved, we'll see a broadening of who can provide these services. However, what I said a few minutes ago about big guys and little guys is going to hold out true. The Chases, the Citibanks, the Bank of Americas, they want us vanilla fudge customers. They want all of us people that do exactly the same thing. They don't want to do tailor-made transactions. So the means of competition will increase, but where we see the trend of big organizations is to decrease the services to the broader public. More similar services for more people at a lower cost. So to get a specialized service, we're going to have to find people that really want to do it. Securitization is how those of us that really want to do it are going to do it. And what does it mean? It means that I'm going to do my work, the guys at La Riba are going to do theirs, and MSI is going to do theirs, and so on. and then we're going to make pools, and we're going to sell them to investors. We're going to sell the assets in a pool to an investor, and then regenerate our capital going forward. Now, what does that mean? It means two things. It means that the real investors, the ultimate investors, don't have the guts to do the pioneering work themselves. So they want somebody else to do the dirty work, see how it looks, and then double check our work, and then if they like it, they'll invest. If they don't like it, they won't. But this will be the big gateway for expanding Islamic financial services in America. And it's going to impact the structure of transactions that we're going to pick. People, institutions that we've surveyed will not invest in a shared equity. From a Sharia point of view, they can't invest in a murabaha. So you're going to hear more and more as more people offer, and as we expand our Islamic financial alternatives in America, you're going to hear more and more about leasing because it is the most flexible vehicle for everybody. And as I said, it's the thing that says, I no longer have to go to Brother Zubair and beg him to shift all of his money from Merrill Lynch to me. I can go to institutions. If I do my work right, I can go to other players and convince them that investing Islamically is good for them too. And that will facilitate the growth of services. What I'd really like to see is that 5 years from now, somebody would come up to this podium as the speaker on Islamic financial services and say, there are now 45 companies, and each one has $1 billion in assets, and they're going gangbusters, and it's all very exciting stuff. That would be a good thing for the Muslim consumer. It would mean there's choice. It would mean that there is investment alternatives for you personally. It would mean that you would have confidence for the first time. It would mean that instead of my going and begging Brother Zubair would say, which of these 45 alternatives do I prefer? Things should change, and I hope they will change in the next 5 years. Now, what drives our organization, for instance? What makes this all happen? Well, it's Sharia guidance. What we try to do, and what I think most people should try to do, is try to have a systematic approach to analysis of the Sharia. So ours is a top to bottom down process. It's a dual process. On the top, we have Sheikh Muhammad Taqi Uthmani from Pakistan and Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi from Bahrain as Sharia advisors. They appoint auditors that come and look at the contracts we use, that come and sit in our office and see how we work, listen to us on the phone, look into the investment files, and determine, are we complying with the fatwa that they issued about products? Are we doing what we told them we're doing? So that's the top-down bit. We then internally run seminars for the staff. We bring shuyukh in, we bring different people in, we bring the books in, and we try to educate as broad an array of the staff as possible so that they can have a basic understanding of things, so that they can tell you if they don't know. We're not asking our staff to give fatwa out, we're asking them to know enough to guide you to the right place, to get the right answer so that you can make that decision. But Sharia guidance is what's going to have to lead this. It's going to shift from what it's been in America for a while, what I want to do because I know it's right, but I'm something else during my daylight job, to a professionally structured business where people are getting proper Sharia guidance that you'll be able to verify. You'll be able to email Justice Taqi and say, did you really give this fatwa? Is this really okay? In our case, too, we think prior experience is going to mean a lot. I don't think that it's going to be easy for people to jump in and offer Islamic financial services until we as Muslims build a broader pool of people that have either a knowledge of the Sharia and a knowledge of financial services that are married together. You have to have people that have spent the time to understand what it is that we should be doing. One of the things we like to say in our organization, because we have a multi-billion-dollar asset management business for the Arabian Peninsula, we have investors come and they say, I want you to do this transaction this way, and you'll earn this much money. And I have non-Muslim colleagues who will say, I won't do that transaction that way because I don't think it's Sharia compliant, and I don't care about not earning the money. You have to have that gut understanding to be able to say to the customer, I'm going to be strict about my compliance with Sharia, whether you are or you're not. And then I think market knowledge will be something. Who's going to spend the time with us as a community to understand what we want, what we need, and more importantly, to educate us? Because my best guess is that the average person within the Islamic community doesn't have a good grasp of what the risks are, what the issues are relating to riba, relating to gharar. And I think on top of that, if we look at the third of Muslims who tell us repeatedly that they're very serious about this issue, I think we're going to find that they too don't yet feel comfortable, or maybe I should say we too don't yet feel comfortable that we agree what are the meanings of these issues. So there's a market knowledge from education of the consumer to education of the provider to providing a meaningful service. And then I think client responsiveness. Everybody would like to be treated well. You'd like to know that when you go to an Islamic organization that you'll be treated as well or better than if you went to any other organization. I think just to conclude, we're going to see in the next few years now more ways to deal with your money to comply with the Sharia in North America offered by more people, more organizations, and that these ways will be good for you and they'll be Sharia compliant. It's a marketplace. We are a marketplace today with substantial barriers to entry. It's not the type of thing that somebody's going to choose easily to do. Where are the Muslims? What languages do I have to speak to deal with the Muslims? Do Muslims from this country think the same way as Muslims from that country about this same issue? Do Muslims who are both strict from the same place feel the same way? There's a lot of things that you have to choose to specialize in order to work in this marketplace and help the Islamic consumer have financial activities that are consistent with his or her values. And it requires that focused Sharia guidance. It's got to be persistent, consistent assistance. And I think to succeed, we have to be now on the cutting edge of a number of alternative investor needs. Now, I read last night on the way down from New York a biography of J.P. Morgan, and it was a really interesting biography. And the two things that jumped out at me about J.P. Morgan were, number one, his job when he started it in the 1850s was to bring money from where it was to a place where its holders didn't want it to go, to help a people with great promise. That's our job. The second thing is, J.P. Morgan didn't have terribly high level of personal or commercial ethics. And it's our job as Muslims to have a terribly high, the highest standard of commercial and personal ethics. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you for being very patient with our late wake-ups and our technical delays and everything else. Assalamu alaikum.
We will accept questions from the audience. Will the brother go to the microphone? Yes, Dr. Qazi.
You mentioned writing a letter to your congressman regarding the new bills that are going to be passed about the banking industry. Will you please give us some kind of format or a copy of a letter that we can give to the Muslim community here so we can send a good number of letters?
Okay, what I'll do is I'll send a format with the committee chairman's names to Sheikh Mohammed, and I'll highlight in very simple things the 2 or 3 points that Muslims should be most concerned about to ask your senators and congressmen to consider as we look at the reform of the financial system. It's actually more important this time because it's systemic reform as opposed to simply banking reform. It's all of the financial institutions. Yes, brother.
Yes, you talked about investors fulfilling the investors' needs. What I like to know is when the larger banks merge, you talk about possibly some of the services that are given to customers will fall by the wayside, and will this new Islamic institution address those?
I think it's a good question. I hope I apologize if I was in any way unclear. The trend in banking right now and financial services in the United States is to very large and very small. And those institutions that are becoming very large are offering homogenized, one-size-fits-all services which cut out minority communities, not by design, mind you, which cut out specialized, higher-cost services towards more demanding consumers. So that leaves smaller organizations to fill the gaps. It's our goal on the Islamic frontier to be more responsive towards the areas that the Islamic community needs, which are, I believe, are by definition the areas that the larger banks are excluding as they become bigger and bigger. So inshallah that'll be the case. Yes, sister?
Habitat for Humanity offers homes. You could use labor hours, and then they only give you like $250 a month for like a 15-year plan with no interest. But for some people, if you qualify, but there are people who need homes, and they do not want to do the riba. And maybe you spoke on it earlier, but I didn't understand. Can you pick a practical aspect there? If you wanted to get a home, how can you go by using the Sharia?
Okay. This is probably the core question that people ask the most frequently. There are 3 ways to do it now in the United States provided by 3 very different types of organizations. We have something which is a lease-to-own program, not yet available in Florida, but available in California and Connecticut. The communities in Toronto, St. Louis, and Northern California have set up cooperatives. Unfortunately, because they've been capital constrained, they don't have enough money invested in the cooperatives by members, they have even higher requirements. So those have not yet worked well. And there have been 1 or 2 organizations which have offered the murabaha with relatively lower down payments. I think it's a question of 2 things, sister. The first one is of organization and of market definition. I think what your community in Florida, if you're from Florida, I don't know, has done is they've educated us that we should want to do business here. So, in fact, we're on our way later this year. But if that weren't the case, then if this is something that's truly desired, if it's high on the list next to Islamic education, now that you've got several masajid and you've got some schools that you need to expand, if it's the next thing on the list, you really ought to have some committees talking about what can you do to either attract investors to it, create from your own investment pools people to make these things go. I think there's increased interest to invest in the Islamic communities from external players. That's part of our job. But I think it's an underdeveloped area today, and it's an area where the consumer has to go to the masjid and create a sense of urgency. Can we all do this together? Do we all want this service? What can we do now? It's something which, unfortunately, the answer is most Muslims cannot today buy their house free from the sin of riba. And certainly not as easily as they can under Habitat for Humanity.
Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I have a question. What programs do you have for money investment, and how to ensure it's going into halal projects?
I have no programs for investment, and I'll tell you why. I returned from the U.S. from overseas in '87 and tried to get into the Islamic finance fields, do the startup thing with some other brothers, did a fair number of studies, did a couple of surveys on a national basis. And what you, the Muslim American, told me was that you were very worried about people asking you for money. Not simply because of the halal question, but also because of the professional management, the quality of returns. All of the questions were there. So organizationally, when we decided to offer these services to the American Muslim community, we said, let's start by taking our money, our investors' money, and putting it effectively into your pocket by starting with the home finance program and the mosques and schools program. How do you know it's halal? We have a known Sharia board, we have Sharia auditors, and they come in and analyze us. And they give fatwa. So You can ask them, you can ask us, you can ask the auditors. Inshallah, once we get a little farther down the road, we hope to have the investment programs, but that's not a today issue. The priority is to help people get into their homes and to help the mosques and the schools.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Brother, I was wondering if you could spread some light on day trading and whether it's halal in retrospect. I'm not sure how familiar you might be with it or if anyone else is familiar with it. But it's different than the conventional trading. It's just, you just keep on going at it, and you can have like 15 trades of a stock in a matter of 5 minutes. So can you just spread some light? Is it halal in Islamic terms? Or?
The brother's referring to those people who invest in the stock market, but what they do is they buy and sell securities multiple times in the course of the same day. So they may buy in and out of the security because the price moves up and down by small increments. In fact, there's an element of day trading which looks to sell securities on the up or the down tick. So when looking at exploiting very small margins in money, the ulama have not issued any fatwa on the issue. There is a body of ulama which thinks that it's actually quite acceptable. It's like buying and selling any other goods in their views. From my own personal view, I just don't have a clear idea. I have worries about it, but I have not studied enough to understand.
Where do you think I could find out more information about if anyone has given fatwa or if
No one's given a fatwa on it. In my next session, I'll be giving out a list of the websites that have Islamic finance debate and where there are a number of the Sharia scholars involved. And you can catch me at the door. I'll give you one of those if you're not going to the career session. And you can go to the Islamic Finance Net and ask. It's been brought up on the Islamic Finance Net with no resolution. The shuyukh who are on the Islamic Finance Net have all refused to answer.
Jazakallah khair.
You can stop at any time you want.
Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
A lot of the financial Islamic institution, or let's say the businesses who loan money to the Muslim, and they are Muslim, they have like really harsh, conditions. Yeah. For example, there's some, I don't want to mention names. I'm trying to avoid names, but some of them, if you want to have a house and you want to get loan from them, at least you have to come with like 50% of the value of the house, and then you need to wait 5 to 10 years to get money.
I'll interrupt you if you don't mind, Brother Samer. The issue here goes back to what I was mentioning much earlier in the presentation about the level of organization and capital raised today in the Islamic communities. The answer, unfortunately, is that there is not enough capital yet dedicated to the Islamic communities that those community groups that offer these services can actually afford to serve more than 1 or 2 people with a lower down payment. That's the bottom line.
Is there any changing coming? Is there any banker, any big bank looking at our community and says,
No,
okay,
just little ones.
so we're going to be in the same position probably in 5 years?
No, actually, you see, the difference was that no banks were looking at the community before. So what you've gone is community organizations at a low level of structure and a low level of capital, unable to provide the level of satisfaction that you personally want as a consumer. Mm-hmm. We're now about to move into organizations that have $3 to $4 billion of money to invest, where they can provide substantial service to a broader number of people. That works. The Muslim proves to be a good consumer. The Islamic instruments prove to make sense. Then what we're going to find is more and more organizations will want to serve the marketplace. So it's actually changing in a positive light.
So, but from your side, I mean, because you know better than probably most of us, can't you see there's any changing coming to the Muslim market soon, or?
I think there is. I think the entrance of new players is happening as we sit here, and the dedication of more resources.
So how you can define the difference between those people who's coming to this market? Like Citibank, for example.
Well, I'll give you the example. The people who've done it now, whether it's, and I'll name names because there's no shame in what they do. They're all good people trying good things. La Riba, Al-Amin, the Islamic Cooperative Housing Society in Toronto, MSI, most of the people who work there are doing something else as a professional during the day. So they're not professional organizations. All of their money comes out of the immediate community around them. So it goes back to, I'm not sure I want to give my money to the engineer or the cardiologist, all of my money, to manage. I'll give him a little. I'll let him start. So they're capital constrained. They don't have enough money to do the jobs. Because they don't have enough money, they can't hire full-time professionals. Because they don't have full-time professionals, they can't get more money. It's a vicious cycle. Now, what I'm saying is that there are organizations like ours which have some substance, which are going to enter the market. We're not going to satisfy all of the market needs, but we're going to develop enough of the market that there should be an opportunity for the next level of growth in the marketplace. So we're now at the verge of change that's positive for the Muslim consumer. Works at the next level, we should see broader expansion by more institutions. So we're going up the next step of growth to serve our community. It's actually getting better. It may not feel good yet, but it's getting better.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. I have two quick questions for you. My first question is, throughout your lecture you mentioned shared equity. I was wondering, when you talked about the co-op housing in Toronto, is that an example of the shared equity method or
Yes.
the leasing method?
No, it's a shared equity program.
Okay, could you give me an applied example of how the leasing method would work with regards to who owns when and
Absolutely.
how long?
We actually provide the leasing method now in California and Connecticut. We actually are studying to provide it in Florida later this year. The leasing method occurs by, we buy a property, you select the property, we buy it, you make a deposit of 20% or as we agree, and then you make your monthly payments of rent to us for the use of the property. We pay the taxes and the insurance, which we're now using Takaful USA to provide the insurance cover, and then you pay an additional monthly on-account payment, which aggregates towards buying out our equity at a future date, at the term of the lease. And our leases are 30-year leases, and its formal name in Sharia or in the Arabic literature is Ijara wa Iqtina, and it works very well.
Okay, my second question is with regards to investing in companies by which their main source of income is not interest. For example, you might invest in a technologies network company whose main source of revenue is not interest, it's selling their products. But since their products might cost millions of dollars, they do at some point have to charge interest for outstanding balances, etc., and so forth. Would it be acceptable to invest in such companies through buying of shares, etc.?
The FIC Council has permitted the investment in shares. The Islamic Development Bank and a large number of Islamic investors globally are now investing in shares. The criteria that they have agreed upon is that a company must not have any exposure whatsoever to pornography, to alcohol. It should have its exposure to other things that are reprehensible, including interest income, limited to 5%, although the new Dow Jones program is 10%. And that the total leverage to market capitalization should be no more than 30%. And the FIC Council said, if you choose to invest in these companies, there is no blame attached to you. And they've provided a methodology for purifying the dividends of the exposure to the forbidden income from riba, etc.
There are companies that build homes. That's their business. They just build whole neighborhoods. Like, for example, in Florida, there's this company called Dimitri Homes, and they build a whole neighborhood. You might go and just choose whichever home you want and pay whatever it is. But do you think the Muslim community could say to Dimitri Homes, hey, I'll give you a contract. You've built us a whole neighborhood. Give us a straight price, and we buy every home in that community. And you do the building, and we'll give you a payment over this period, and it'll just be, you're sure that every lot has a home, has an owner. Can we do something like that?
Why not?
Okay. Don't know.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.
First of all, I just want to congratulate you for your efforts in this regard in terms of bringing to the Muslim community services that are so desperately needed. What I wanted to ask was whether or not you had any concerns over a possible trend to exaggerate perhaps a bit some of the distinctions between traditional organs of finance and what are going as Islamic organs of finance in order to highlight the desirability of the Muslim or Islamic mechanisms or institutions over the traditional ones. I have some specific things in mind, but that would probably get into names, so I won't go into that kind of depth. But one of the things that concerns me is that oftentimes when we come together to discuss these issues, there's a tendency to exaggerate. We, for example, talk about halal food or halal meat. What do we really mean by that? We mean a very narrow definition of halal, whereas in fact from a Sharia point of view, the definition may be much, much broader. And some of that might be taking place with regard to these financial institutions, which in the short run would of course make things much more difficult on the Muslim rather than easy. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts or comments on that.
Well, now you've given me the third comment first. So, inna ma'al usri yusra, what starts with difficulty becomes easy by Allah's will. And I think the point is when you start anything from scratch, it's never going to be easy, it's never going to be cheap. So there is no ease in any of these organizations which are startups. The second element is we know who we are amongst those third of the Muslims that truly desire to be riba-free. And those individuals need no exaggeration to be convinced to participate in an Islamic program. And as for the two-thirds that are sitting on the fence or not desirous of the services, why bother exaggerating anything to them? That's our professional view. Why bother? If they don't want it today, or if they don't feel comfortable today, let them see how it works and come to us tomorrow. Now, if I'm a small shop with limited capitalization, and I might die if I don't get the next customer, and that could be a life and death issue for a number of these organizations, I probably feel the traditional salesman's pressure to exaggerate. What can I say?
Dr. Thomas, I will follow up with that previous question. Several times it is asked that the difference between leases and installment sales and the conventional American mortgage is only in the form and not in substance, because these leases and these installment sales are based upon the market interest rates. And there really is not an equity or the sharing of the risk involved. And so if it is only a difference in the form, then how do you really accomplish something which is commanded by Allah in the Quran?
Brother Zubair has raised two very different issues. He may think he's only raised one. The first issue is the issue which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has addressed in Surah Al-Baqarah, where He forbids riba and says that they say it is like trade, but it's not. And I think the first point is when we know that something different has taken place, when we know the contract is different, there's a procedure, there are things that have to take place for a contract to be acceptable by Sharia. When we know those procedures have been fulfilled, it's an Islamic contract. Is it a competitive contract? Do you like the contract? Those are issues only you can answer. The next issue, though, is take our residential program. People say, I want to use the local real estate brokers index for rental rates. I don't want to use whatever benchmark you have. Well, I have two problems with that. Not that I don't want to use the local real estate brokers index, but my first problem is the controller of the currency says, I must tell you where to find the benchmark, whatever it is, so that you can verify it independently. And none of the real estate indices are national or published in an independently verifiable manner in a systematic way today. So I can't use them by law, so I've got to use something else. The second element is I'm getting all of my investment money from people who buy leases, buy assets that are leased overseas. And they tell me what they're going to set the rental benchmark at. You say that sounds like an interest rate. Yes, it is an interest benchmark for people who buy things or who borrow money at interest. But it's a rental rate because you're going to use my asset. We're free to negotiate the benchmarks as we see fit amongst ourselves. They could be whatever we agree upon. As Muslims, the Sharia doesn't say what the benchmark should or shouldn't be. The second issue, though, is a bit different. There are a number of issues within the Sharia, a number of the financial relationships which involve risk-taking and a number which do not. This is exactly what Imam Abdul Hakim was just talking about a moment ago. It says, here you have the glorious umbrella of Sharia that's very broad. And somebody comes in and says, no, just this part of the umbrella, that's what's really halal. All the other part of the umbrella is not. Well, that's not true. But if you came from Pakistan, for instance, and you saw the way the banks were behaving there with their so-called Islamic transactions, you'd say murabaha is a bad word. And you'd be right to feel that way. And then if you were listening to some of the scholars from that area who were previously socialists before they became Islamic activists, they emphasize the musharaka and mudaraba models. They're saying risk-taking, risk-taking, risk-taking. And so they're taking your personal experience and your local scholars are telling you to go to this part of the umbrella only, and yet the umbrella is much bigger. We know that our Prophet, peace be upon him, leased things. We know that a number of the murabaha is the oldest form of installment credit sale documented in the world. So we know that these less risk-oriented transactions have permissibility going back to the time of the Sahaba and the Prophet, peace be upon him. So we have to be careful, how do we orient some of these things? The umbrella is broad. We have to live within the umbrella. Sometimes it costs more to live on the umbrella, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes living in the umbrella keeps you just as dry as living under a different umbrella, but it's our umbrella. And when we start following the Islamic transactions, you said, well, this lease system is very similar to a mortgage system. Well, it's actually different in substance too. You have fewer rights, and you also have fewer obligations than you do under a mortgage under the Islamic leases. So it's actually very different. When you only look at 2 or 3 parts of the things that a consumer frequently looks at, it's exactly the same, or it feels the same. But when you get into the whole list, it's very different. How are we doing on the time?
I think we have another 10 minutes that we can discuss this subject. I appreciate very much your comments on that. The concern that I have on behalf of the lots of people that raise that question and ask me, because I'm also in a profession which is similar to yours, is that if in substance the rights of the person who has leased the property are less than what the rights are under a mortgage, and if the person has to pay more than what he has to pay on a conventional mortgage, so really the situation is detrimental to the person going through the Islamic financing. Now, if we could make it competitive, and if we could give more rights to the person, then that will be advantageous. So I just want to understand how we can make it in such a way that it is more attractive and it is more beneficial to our people to go the Islamic route rather than the conventional one.
I'm going to address, and I hope Brother Zubair will bear with me and forgive me if I say anything that he may feel is hurtful. If I give you more rights, it will not comply with the Sharia. SubhanAllah, in America, you have huge rights. And these sisters can all walk around these halls in bikinis. And they're completely free to do so. But look how the sisters have chosen to dress in a place where it's hot and humid. When you choose Islam, you will choose to give up certain rights, as seen by somebody else's eyes. So and that translates from the sisters' clothes, to the meat, to the way we organize our financial affairs. So I can't give you an Islamic transaction with more rights. I can only give you an Islamic transaction, in fact, with fewer rights. I'm sorry. That's the deal. However, competitiveness is a different matter. And competitiveness depends on really three things. It's really simple. Where does the money come from? How big is the market? That means how many people are actually today participating in the market, doing whatever it is, and how many people are serving those needs. So what Brother Abdul Hakim brought out earlier was you've got all these startups out there serving a very tiny group of people. By definition, that's more expensive. Now, in my case, I get my money from a certain pool of investors. And those investors want their money accounted for in a certain way. I don't have any. I don't have $1. I don't have $100 million. I don't have $1 billion. I don't have $1 trillion of interest-free deposits that I can go out tomorrow morning and say, let's subsidize the Muslims. Let's cut the rate. But when Bank of America, we're in California, when Bank of America has a mortgage sale, they can go to $1 trillion of interest-free deposits and say all mortgages will be 4% for the next 2 years. I will never, ever be able to compete with that because I don't get my money from people that don't want money. I don't have idle current accounts, checking accounts with no interest. But when Bank of America doesn't have a sale, I'll give you a fair deal. I'll give you a fair deal, and on some of the days, it'll be a better deal, and on some of the days, it'll be a worse deal. And that'll be just like any other competitor in a marketplace.
That's very good. I appreciate very much this comment. Actually, the competitiveness is the key to our success, but then before we can achieve the competitiveness, more and more people will have to get involved in it, and more funds will have to come in. And there is the other side, which Brother Thomas is pointing out. With more rights and more liberal financing, people can go into heavy indebtedness, and the loans can be utilized with impunity and with no benefit to the individuals. So the restrictions on them can really be beneficial so that you utilize the loan only for very legitimate and very reasonable purposes, and there is not a big attraction for you to go and borrow money. At the same time, if people would invest money in organizations like he is suggesting, and then are not expecting high rewards, and they could be very competitive. Thank you. That lady, you have a question?
I was wondering about 401k programs that businesses offer through their employers. Are they considered haram or halal, or is there a way to ensure where your money is going if they are invested in such a program?
Okay, the sisters asked a very good question, but it's a little bit of a different question, so I'm going to use a different analogy. A 401k program is a car, and an IRA is a Mercedes, and a 401k is a Lexus, and my stockbroker's account is a Chevrolet. These are all vehicles. So the vehicles, we all know cars are permissible. You can get in a car and drive it around town and go and do good things with it. 401ks are, there isn't a Sharia opinion on them because they're just a vehicle. They're an acceptable vehicle. So what do you do within it? It depends on your employer at the end of the day. What rights does your employer give you within the program? Buying and selling of stocks, investing in stocks is permissible. That's accepted by the Sharia according to the guidelines I've mentioned. Buying your corporate stock may be acceptable. So within 401ks, if you're corporate, for instance, when I was at Sumitomo, my corporation gave me about 95 choices. and about 10 or 15 of them were completely permissible. Now, ironically, my employer gives me about 3 choices, and only one is permissible. But we'll change that, inshallah. But so it depends on the vehicles. If you're allowed to buy stock, you're allowed to buy mutual funds. They're actually now vetted for the 401k programs. A number of the ethical mutual funds, including the Amana Mutual Funds Trust, some of the ethical mutual funds are organized by the Catholic Church, like the Calvert funds, etc., in fact, have similar restrictions on debt and so on that the Muslims do. They don't get involved in alcohol, pork, and other bad things too. So the answer is the vehicle's not being driven where we want it to go yet for most Muslims, but the vehicle's acceptable, and you should push your employer to make more choices available to you if you can.
We are running out of time, and the 2 gentlemen at the back, they previously have asked questions, so unless it is very important, maybe the gentleman at the microphone, maybe he should first ask the question, and let us see how it goes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Just a quick comment and then a quick question. The comment regarding the statement earlier that unfortunately Muslims do not take the risk to put their money and do their transactions with Muslim professional organizations and so on. So number one, I think the Muslims, we have to trust each other and take extra risk for for God's sake. But also the people who do the professional organizations, financial things, they really need to try to be at the highest level of skillfulness and to do things right. My question is regarding the leasing, the credit card, for example, the concept when I don't pay all the credit on the credit card, all the money, of course, every day is calculated according to interest. And I'm sorry if this was answered earlier, but I came late. How do you do that in Islamic leasing? If I'm late in payment, what is the process or concept? How is the penalty fee is paid?
I'm going to break your question into 2 parts because you said 2 different things, if you don't mind. The answer is on our Ijara wa Iqtina programs and our Ijara programs, we have a flat fee which represents our actual cost of calling you and chasing you. We're not allowed to charge more. We don't compound. So for the home buyers, I think it's something like $50 if they pay late beyond a certain point. We can't compound. We can't collect any form of penalty interest. It's forbidden. Now, the credit cards, you have a credit card, you don't pay on time, you're charged interest. That is the forbidden riba. That's all there is to it.
Yes, one more question, please.
Related to the 401k, we know stocks, we can direct our money to certain stocks. Mutual funds, there's no way you can know where they are invested. Especially most of the mutual funds say put money on bonds, say.
Well, I disagree, if you don't mind. You have something like, 2,500 stock mutual funds and another 2,500 bond mutual funds, and then probably 2,500 mixed and balanced funds. There are now, I think, 3 Islamic mutual funds operating in the U.S. There are several ethical mutual funds run by non-Muslims who have very similar concerns. They all publish quarterly what their investments were, so you have some ability to monitor and assess. You even have a number of brokers now, both Muslim and non-Muslims at firms, who will have programs that they apply to analyze the portfolios and cleanse them by paying money to charity of the of the excess income beyond a certain point that's unacceptable. By the way, the Fiqh Council has also said that if you earn, whether by, in this case, you intend to buy stock or a mutual fund and you get this income, you know it's going to happen, or whether you get it unintentionally, that you give the money to charity, you give this as kafara to charity. It's not zakat, it's not sadaqat for your account, but it's to purify this, and they do accept that. That is a decision of the Fiqh Council.
Thank you very much. That brings to end this session, and I want to thank you very much, Brother Abdul Qadir, for a very enlightening and very current subject and very interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.